All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone, and thanks for calling in today. Our event today is called Ask GFI Alt Protein Careers, and this is an open Zoom call that we host every 3 months. And this is to give you an opportunity to ask any questions you have about working in the alternative protein field. So my name is Christina Aguila, and I work as the University Innovation Specialist here at the Good Food Institute. I've been at GFI for about 1.5 years. My background is in chemical engineering, and I actually worked in the biopharma space prior to pivoting into alternative proteins and joining GFI. So currently I'm focused on really building a robust workforce to support a global transition towards alternative proteins. And one of the ways I'm doing that is by illuminating pathways into this field, which we'll cover during this webinar. So this call is geared for anyone that is wanting to learn more about building a career in this space. So this could be someone looking for technical roles, someone looking for business and operations roles. And this can also range from students that are maybe looking for careers post-graduation, and also professionals with maybe years or decades of experience. So we typically do have an audience with a really broad range of backgrounds. So I'm going to try to keep all of these groups in mind, but of course, please do feel free to ask any specific questions in the chat, and we'll try to cover as many of those today as possible. So to give you a quick overview of how the hour is going to be structured, I'll start with about 20 minutes of a presentation overview that covers the different career fields, as well as tips and resources for searching for jobs and building your resume in this space. And then after that, we're going to have a career chat with Milena Ivanisevic, who is someone that began their career in a different field of research and then transitioned into working in alternative proteins. So we're going to get to hear all about her story, including some advice on making a successful career pivot. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So we're going to save all of the audience questions for the end. So again, if you have any questions for either me or Milena, please feel free to submit them at any point, and we'll get to them until the top of the hour. So we'll go ahead and dive in. For those of you that don't already know, the Good Food Institute is an international nonprofit working to build a sustainable, healthy, and just global food system. And we're doing this with unique insight across the scientific, policy, industry, and investment landscapes. So we're essentially using the power of food innovation and markets to accelerate the transition toward alternative proteins. And in order to do this, we focus on 3 key areas of work. There is our science and technology department, where we're working to advance and open source the foundational science of alternative proteins. And then we also have a corporate engagement team that builds relationships with some of the world's largest food manufacturers, restaurants, retailers, and even conventional meat companies to help them really capitalize on opportunities in this space. And then lastly, our policy team advocates for the fair regulation of alternative proteins and also lobbies for more government investment in research. And what motivates our work is the very fact that our current system for producing meat, dairy, and eggs is extremely unsustainable and inefficient. And because of that, the system exacerbates things like climate change and environmental degradation and antibiotic resistance, as well as global food insecurity, and of course, issues of animal welfare. And more people are learning about this. However, we're not seeing enough individuals changing the way they eat. Actually, we're seeing per capita meat consumption continuing to rise on a global level. So GFI's theory of change is based on the idea that consumers will choose alternative proteins when they are as delicious, affordable, and accessible as conventional animal products. So rather than just asking consumers to completely give up the foods that they love or the foods that they grew up with, we can instead make products that are just as tasty and affordable as conventional meat. These are the main ways that we can produce alternative proteins. We can use plants or fermentation, or we can cultivate it from animal cells. So starting from the leftmost column, when we refer to plant-based products, we're specifically talking about next generation products that look, taste, and cook like conventional meat while offering complex carbs and fiber. So we're not really talking about tofu or foods that don't actually replicate meat. We're more so talking about things like the Beyond Meat patty pictured here. Two recognizable examples of plant-based meat brands are Impossible and Beyond, but there are plenty of other brands out there. So if you notice an alternative meat product at your local grocery store, chances are that it's a plant-based product. On the right-hand side, we have cultivated meat, which is, you might have also heard of it as cultured meat or cell-based meat. And this is meat that's produced directly from animal cells. So you start with a small sample of animal cells and place it inside a bioreactor that provides a lot of the same conditions you would find inside an animal, such as warmth, water, and basic nutrients. And then the next step is differentiating these cells into other types of cells and arranging them in a similar structure as animal tissues. And the result is genuine animal meat. It's a product with the same sensory and nutritional profiles. So there are currently dozens of cultivated meat companies around the world, but they haven't yet reached commercial scale production. So on the technology side, the challenge is scaling up these processes and bringing down costs. And then on the policy side, many countries are still in the process of formalizing their regulatory requirements in order to approve cultivated meat for sale. So as a result, cultivated meat isn't yet sold in most stores, unless you happen to be in Singapore, whose government was the first to approve these products. And also over in the US, the company Upside Foods recently received a green light on their cultivated meat from the FDA. So hopefully US consumers will get to try these products soon as well. And then the last production platform listed here is fermentation. And this is an enabling technology that allows you to produce standalone protein sources or functional ingredients. One brand you might recognize is the brand Corn, spelled with a QU, and their mycoprotein product. So with fermentation, you can essentially program microorganisms into little factories that produce specific proteins or fats. And then we can either isolate those proteins from the microbes and just use those proteins as standalone ingredients, or we can harvest the entire protein biomass. And what this means from, I guess, a consumer perspective is that we can take plant-based and cultivated products to the next level with the addition of these fermentation-derived ingredients. So it's one important note I want to make is that going forward, as this industry scales, we probably won't see these three production platforms as distinct industry segments. We're more likely to see it as one large alternative protein industry where we're producing these products across the spectrum. So one example is the Impossible Burger. We often kind of talk about it as if it fits neatly into the plant-based category, but in reality, it uses fermentation to produce like hemoglobin, which is the signature ingredient that gives it that bloody appearance and kind of meaty taste. So that's just one example of a product that's technically a hybrid. However, when we're thinking about career spaces and what skill sets are needed for which companies and such, it can be useful to differentiate between these three production platforms. So if you're, now I want to go ahead and look at the value chain for the alt protein field. And I want to start by saying that if you're looking for roles in science and technology, it might make sense to start your focus here in these areas. So you might lend your skills to process optimization or end product formulation, or play a more upstream role in identifying ingredients or supplying optimal inputs. And then research and development powers all of these segments of the value chain. So there is a lot of technological innovation we need, but when we zoom out and view the entire alternative protein ecosystem, there's clearly a greater diversity of roles, not just limited to science and engineering. So for instance, we need investment to really power all of this research. And once we develop the end products, we also need to establish distribution channels that can make these products actually accessible to consumers. And across all of these stages, we're depending on these industry enablers, such as the labor force, business services, and compliance. So one of the most common questions we get, especially from students, is, what should I study in order to pursue a career in this field? And our answer is really that it depends, because each segment of this value chain employs many different roles requiring a range of skill sets. And on top of that, this is an emerging field, an emerging technology field. And what that means is that some roles are going to be more in demand now, and we're expecting others to be more in demand later. So we're going to dive more into that in this section on career fields and relevant backgrounds. So if you're someone that's narrowed it down to careers in science and engineering, then these are some key areas of technical expertise needed by the industry. So it's not a complete list, but hopefully it gives you an idea of how these different production platforms differ and also overlap. I want to note that we recently administered a survey to companies all across the alternative protein space. And out of about 130 companies, we found that some of the most in-demand skill sets across all three production platforms were food science and biotechnology. But all of these key disciplines listed here are important as well. And then presently, there's also really high demand for the right combination of scientific expertise and entrepreneurial spirit. But in order to build the full alternative protein ecosystem, we need expertise from other fields too. So these are just some of the non-technical roles that exist in this space. Really, any company in the industry is going to have positions related to business, marketing, sales, HR, and finance. And also a lot of the roles listed on this slide relate to consumer acceptance and accessibility, awareness building, and sustainable development, which are all super important issues that we need to focus on to build the future of food. So in this last section for this intro presentation, I'm going to offer various tips and resources for building a career in this space. And I also want to note that I'll be sharing a link to these slides with you. So you'll have all the links accessible, so don't worry about copying any of these down. So I've mentioned a few times that alternative proteins are kind of an emerging field or an emerging technology. And to be more precise about what I mean by that, I mean that it draws from multiple parent disciplines in order to address a really tricky problem. And that problem is, how can we produce meat more sustainably and humanely? So when you're pursuing a career in a more established field, let's say tech, for example, it can feel a lot more straightforward because there's already a lot of existing clear educational pathways through a computer science degree program or a boot camp. And there's all these formal structures like professional societies and mentorship programs. We don't really have that same luxury in emerging fields because the industry is still evolving and the educational pathways into the field are still kind of under construction. So as a result, this can make it feel really overwhelming to figure out, what steps do you actually need to take in order to set yourself up to enter this space? So to help answer this question, we've looked at patterns across other emerging industries. So for example, this list of steps for training yourself in an emerging field actually came from folks in the field of ecological forecasting. So I've kind of modified their advice to make it fit a little more to our field of alternative proteins. So I'd like to step through some of these tips and share some relevant resources to help with each of these steps. So number one is to set goals and build a learning plan. And you can start to build your learning plan by answering 3 questions. Why alternative proteins? What specific knowledge and skills do you need to land your ideal position? And what education and training options are available to help you develop those skills? You probably have the answer to number 1 already, but the answers to number 2 and 3 are trickier to figure out. So I really recommend reaching out directly to the people that already work in the roles that you are interested in working in. And you can find these folks on LinkedIn or through their company's website on their About Us page. And unless you reach out to someone that's super busy, a lot of people in this space are generally really excited to offer advice and share their personal stories. So just know that cold emailing, cold outreach is a really important part of this career discovery phase. So here's an example email, but definitely don't just copy paste that. Change it up, add your personality and your passions and your personal motivations so that you have a better odds at getting a response. Step number 2 is to leverage existing resources, both within and outside the emerging discipline. So if you're pivoting from, let's say, chemical engineering, continue to take advantage of all the chemical engineering resources, especially those that overlap with food science. But you're also going to want to explore all of the resources for the alternative protein field specifically. So I'll give some examples. And as I've said, the lack of training resources is a huge issue in new fields. So that's why GFI really aims to create these resources and make them open access. So for example, if you want to understand the field, you can start with our student resource guide, which is a one-stop shop for really any newcomers to the field to help you explore the alternative protein space. And then we also have these annual state of the industry reports, which cover the commercial landscape, investments, regulatory developments, and the latest technical progress of the different production platforms. And then to go deeper into the science, we have a free open access online course called the Protein Transition. And we also maintain a course database that tracks learning opportunities offered around the globe. And then a few more resources specific to the alt protein field. gfi.org/vocation is our hub for everything careers related as it pertains to the entire alt protein space. So we maintain a career portal that has some available positions across the ecosystem. We have an interview series that profiles a variety of pioneering researchers. And then for those of you interested in entrepreneurship, we also have a startup manual that lays out the key steps for starting an alternative protein company. The next step is that when resources don't exist, you can help create them. So one of the advantages to being in an emerging field is that when you run into this issue of, oh, this resource doesn't exist yet, you now have this opportunity to contribute directly to the field by just creating that resource yourself or contributing to it yourself. And as an added bonus, you then have a concrete example of a contribution that you made to the field. And this is something that you can refer to as you network and apply for jobs. So just to share a couple examples, something you can look into is creating educational resources. So for example, students from Johns Hopkins hosted a workshop on meat mimicry where they designed and led an experiment where they extracted like hemoglobin. And then they took it a step further and made their slides and their lab protocol publicly available through GFI's curriculum repository. So now educators can take this lesson and run it in their own classrooms. Another example is from the students at Wageningen, the Alt Protein Project group there. They developed a thesis guide that helps students identify high impact research ideas. And they also made this publicly available through GFI's resource hub for student movement builders. So again, we are a huge, huge supporter of open access and open sharing. So if there is a resource that you want to create for the field, we can help amplify it. The next step is to attend workshops and conferences. So y'all are already doing that, so great start. And to continue doing that, you can visit gfi.org/events. This is where we post webinars like this one and many more. So for example, each month we have a Science of Alt Protein seminar, which is geared toward a technical audience and focuses on cutting edge research developments. We actually have the next webinar scheduled for this Thursday, and you can still sign up. And separately, we also have a seminar series that focuses on the business side of things. So each of those are every month, and following each of these seminars, we also offer networking mixers where you can meet other attendees one-on-one. And step number 5 is to find collaborators to work with and to learn from. The number 1 resource here is our collaborative research directory, where researchers have submitted their profiles and indicated the kinds of collaborations that they're open to, whether it be with students, labs, or companies. So some of these labs are hiring, and also some of these folks listed in the directory have offered to serve as mentors. So if someone's profile looks interesting, you can go ahead and reach out to them. Maybe reach out for an informational interview if you're just interested in learning more about their career path. You can do that too. And then step number 6 is to learn the history and have a vision for the future of the field. For this, we recommend checking out GFI's Solutions database. This is a database of alternative protein ideas and commercial white spaces. And this will really help you contextualize the field and start to narrow down the contributions that you want to make in really shaping the future of this movement. And then the last step here is to join or help create a network that's specific to the emerging field. One way to do this, if you're a student or if you're someone that is working at a university, we have a university program called the Alt Protein Project. And this is a program dedicated to turning universities into engines for education, research, and innovation in alternative proteins. We currently have over 30 chapters across the globe, and you can visit this link to learn more about starting a chapter at your university. And then for everyone else, whether you're an entrepreneur, scientist, or a subject matter expert, you're also invited to join our GF Ideas community, which is a really great place to network and connect with other folks doing work that you might be interested in. Lastly, I just wanted to share a couple more resources from other organizations that I found really helpful. 80,000 Hours is, they're based in London, and they are a nonprofit that investigates which careers have the largest social impact. And they provide career advice based on those findings. So if you go to their website and filter by factory farming, then their jobs board will include job postings in the alternative protein space. And one more resource is from Animal Advocacy Careers. Their website offers many detailed skills profiles for animal advocacy roles, including this one on technical research for animal product alternatives. And at the bottom, I've also linked a career guide for ending factory farming, which was created by members of the alternative protein community. So that is it for the presentation portion of this webinar. So thank you again for listening for that. And if you have any questions about this, you can drop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end. But for now, we'll move into a career chat with Milena Ivanisevic. Milena is the scientific project manager and also one of the co-founders at the company Connectomix. She began her scientific career doing research in cancer biology and then transitioned into applying molecular biology to alternative food products. So one of the most common questions we get is, how do I pivot into the alternative protein space from a different field? So I'm super excited to have Milena here to share her experience. So I'm going to start by asking a few questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So welcome, Milena. Thank you again for joining us. And I guess first, can we start off by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and the role that you play in the alternative protein space?
Yeah, of course. First of all, thank you for this lovely informative presentation. And thanks for inviting me for the webinar. So I will start from the startup that I have co-founded. So as you mentioned, I'm a co-founder of a startup called Connectomix, and Connectomix offers services in techno-economic analysis and environmental impact analysis, mostly focused on fermentation-derived proteins. However, we have projects in plant-based proteins as well. And many companies that we are working with are not directly in the alternative food space, which really adds to a charm being part of Connectomix, to really, you see that people are interested and would like to enter alternative food space from different industries. So many of these companies, essentially what they want to do, they want to investigate certain infrastructure that they have or IP that they have, and they want to see what potential these have to be implemented in alternative food space. And this, considering that they're not in alternative food space, this often means that they don't have a full overview of the field. And that's where we step in. So what we do is we contribute with the production chain, for example, production chain design or nutritional and safety aspects of their product, as well as analysis of capital cost, operational cost. So essentially, we do this preliminary analysis that companies look for before they look for new investments for R&D, for example, or before putting steel into ground or finding partnerships with other companies out there or other institutions. So currently we are focusing mostly on renewable feedstocks in being utilized in fermentation. What this means is essentially that we look into processes that use compounds like methane, methanol, or hydrogen, which are simple compounds that microorganisms are able to eat and then give commodities that we are currently sourcing in quite environmentally unfriendly way. And this system is quite beautiful because it's decoupled from conventional agriculture in general. So that's about the startup. And my particular role from scientific point of view is that I researched the latest news achievements in not only microbial proteins, but also microbial oils, fermentation derived oils. And this research helps us design a production chain, for example, or to understand biological trade-off of production and also technical trade-offs of production. And all of this is possible because it's a team of people working within the company. But I also help coordinate different aspects of different projects.
Got it. Thanks for that overview. It's really exciting to, I guess, learn about more and more companies starting to offer consulting services to other companies looking to enter the space. I think it's a really great, I guess, signal or indicator that this industry really is growing. So for the next question, I want to pivot to another topic. So many folks attending these career webinars have already started their careers outside the alternative protein field, and for many of these folks, even outside of the food industry. So I know it can be really challenging to pivot into really any new space. So I'd love to dive deeper into your story of how you got here. So could you start by taking us through your career journey so far, maybe starting from what you had originally chosen to study in college?
Yeah, of course. So I would like to mention that I'm quite relatively new to the field. My transition is still relatively fresh. I have been in alternative food space for about a year and a half. So probably my perspective is slightly different from what people who have transitioned some time ago would have. My background in general is in molecular biology. So both in my bachelor's and my master's studies, I was introduced to various aspects of molecular biology, whether that was human molecular biology or microbiology, plant biology. And during my studies in general, I aim to build my scientific career more in human molecular biology, especially in cancer research. However, with time, I pivoted, and with my university background, I was lucky enough to be flexible to go down different routes. But even in this case, the transition had a certain learning curve and catching up to do within the field. And going back to your slides, for example, GFI represents amazing platform where you can inform yourself and build this overview of the field. And it certainly helped me, and strongly recommend to anyone who wants to enter the field, whether that's fermentation, derived protein, or plant or cultivated meats. It's all these resources and written materials, but also webinars with a lot of experts talking about the field and pointing out the let's say, places where we need more people to advance these fields. So in general, with the reading papers and informing myself, I built the overview of the field. And my particular beginning, and where I really got engrossed with the alternative foods, was in particular in microbial oils. So my interest started in investigating molecular biology behind microbial oils. Maybe to give a snapshot why, from scientific point of view, this was very interesting to me. So when you compare fermentation-derived proteins, for example, let's say in bacteria, synthesis of proteins go very straightforward from transcription to translation, and then at the end, bacteria builds this pool of proteins which are running the general metabolism of bacteria. However, and then at the end, when you isolate these proteins, you get a pool of amino acids if you break them down. However, when you look at microbial oils, bacteria or other microorganisms have very different lipid molecules, and they're very differently regulated. So it's very interesting. It's sort of a playground for molecular biology to see and tweak the metabolism and push bacteria to synthesize different lipid molecules that we can, in a different way, utilize later in food and replace conventional products.
Awesome. Thanks for taking us through your journey. And yeah, really interesting to hear about kind of the overlap in molecular biology in this field and compared to where you got your start. So I guess since you work as at a startup, and since you're one of the co-founders, I know that can involve wearing many hats and playing a lot of different roles. So could you tell us a little bit more about what it's like working at a startup? Maybe what are some of the challenges, and also what do you enjoy most about this particular job?
Yeah, so before working in a startup, I was very much oriented towards work in the lab. There are many differences, certainly some overlaps. In general, working in startup, what I find one of the biggest benefits is certainly working very closely with a team within the startup, and you get the opportunity to see very up close how this team grows and evolves and develops and learns together. Another point which I find very attractive working in a startup is this feeling of building something that you really strongly believe in, and you really see the effects of your work very early on. And then lastly is meeting people and communicating with people with different industries and with the people with different backgrounds. But again, these benefits also come with challenges, as you already mentioned. When I started working, when we started Connectomix, I had to be involved in many different aspects, and like also my second co-founder Dorian as well. It's not just scientific projects, it's also being involved in building the business model, developing a business model, being involved in administration and financial aspects, and sometimes this can be a bit overwhelming. In addition to that, you really need to understand the environment where you're building your startup. Essentially, you need to understand your capabilities and to make right decisions at the right time, whether to grow startup, how to grow it, which projects to take on, which to sit down for. Yeah, so I think this would be a few benefits and few challenges of working in a startup.
Got it. Yeah, no, thanks for that overview. I'd also like to dive a bit deeper into the technical skills involved in your transition from one field of research to another. So I'm curious about what are some of the technical skills you developed as a researcher in cancer biology that prepared you for the work you're doing now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think The skills that I had developed in cancer biology or in general can be developed in lab environment regardless of the field that you're working on. It's like I will reflect some skills that I learned from lab environment in general. Mainly it's project organization and time management. It's equally important working in the lab, and I think the lab prepares you in a very nice way to be very organized and to be able to run parallel processes together. And then also very technical and practical skill is data management and organization. Essentially, you need to be, it's like having a working desk. You really need to know where your things are. It's easier if things are sorted on time. And I think maybe the most important one, leaving it for the end, is learning to deal with the mistakes that happen. So having this systematic approach, if you take an example of an experiment, sometimes things do not go as you planned. And sometimes it's sort of out of this, it just happens. But having this systematic approach in analyzing, oh, what went wrong? What I would do now better, because I will repeat this experiment, and what is my next step. So I think these 3 steps, learning how to accept the mistake and improve it, is something that very much is applicable in startup life equally as it is in the lab environment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How about specifically to your company? Are there any specific technical skills that you're looking for that someone could pick up from, from a different field of research or a different lab environment?
Yes, of course. I think in general, alternative food space is a prime example where you can see that people are implementing skills that they have gained from related or even not that related industries to alternative foods. Maybe I can give an example of what we are looking for, and then I can give an example of what the people in the team currently have, their backgrounds. So we are focused very much on modeling, whether that's production chain modeling or techno-economic analysis in general. So someone with a background in understanding modeling well, that's something that we always look for, and also people who understand life cycle analysis and environmental analysis in general. But talking about Connectomix as a team, so for example, co-founder Dorian, his background is in economics and molecular ecology. So the very two different industries. And also Shan, who is leading in techno-economic analysis, her background is in accounting and food technology. We have Yevgen, who is data scientist. His background is in chemistry. And Christina, she's nutritional and safety specialist. Her background is in molecular nutrition. So you can really see that people in our team, and I think in general in alternative foods, are able to combine 2 very different industries that they have worked in or that they have interest in order to position themselves in alternative foods. And that's very valuable and very, very unique, I think.
No, that's really cool. And it sounds also just really exciting to get to work with people with such a range of backgrounds. On that note, I'm also interested in more of the soft skills that you developed in academia that you found to be useful in the startup world. I think this is one of those topics we don't focus on enough when it comes to technical roles. So I know that the transition from university research to industry, some people can find it quite jarring, especially if, for example, a researcher that doesn't have much experience in business might find this transition kind of jarring. So in your opinion, what are some of the most useful soft skills and how do you recommend developing them?
Mm-hmm. I think I would highlight 2. One is learning to communicate with people from the team. You can, if you worked in multiple labs, general labs are very different environments. Every lab has its own environment, and then within these ecosystems, you meet people with different views and different approaches, and learning to accept them and communicate your work in different ways is very valuable, and can certainly be applied in a business and entrepreneurial side. And another thing is using every opportunity to present. And I think this is something that is out of the comfort zone of most of the people. And as every skill, it gets better with time and with repetition. So learning to explain and express your work is, in my opinion, equally important as doing it. And learning to understand your audience and present your work in the context of who is sitting in front of you, and to learn to be structured and concise is very useful. And I think that's something that work in lab environment can teach you, essentially, with this. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. I want to now ask about, I guess, advice for job seekers, especially now that your role maybe involves screening candidates that apply to Connectomix. So what are some of your top tips for job seekers that are applying to startups?
Yes, I think I would highlight three that I personally find important. So again, it's I find interesting, and I found it useful in my case, and from my perspective. So I think it's very important, firstly, to be very clear, to know the field that you wanna apply in, and to be clear in expressing how you can contribute to that field. So know your skills and understand how you can apply them in the field, and how you can add the value to the field, and be very clear in expressing that. Two is reach out and make connections, and be informed. And I think with reaching out, you really create your own opportunities. And it doesn't mean that every connection you make will lead to a job and an offer, but with every connection you will learn more, and with that you will create your own opportunities. And thirdly, be comfortable to be uncomfortable. So be open to learning new skills, and be patient to learn new skills. And I think with that, I think that's quite useful. I think it's applicable to any job search, not only to alternative food industry.
Yeah, no, thank you for those. For those three tips. Hopefully the job seekers find those to be really helpful too. And another question I want to ask about, this is another common question we get from job seekers, but I'd love to get your opinion on how necessary do you think it is to get a master's or a PhD to enter the field, particularly in one of these more technical roles?
Mm-hmm. I want to say that I don't currently, for example, have a PhD. I also don't exclude doing it later on. From my perspective, I work with people who both had masters and PhD and who don't. And in my experience, everyone brings a unique set of skills. And also, like, undoubtedly, you gain a lot from masters and PhD, right? There is the community that is built around it, whether it's university or for example, your lab. There is guidance and experience that you gain. But that is just one of the routes that one can take. Maybe there is, in academia, there is a certain requirements of reaching a degree, but the industry has a bit different views. And we see that in this field that people come from various backgrounds, and they add value regardless of the degree. So I think it's just a matter of the route that you would that you want to choose. And I think people are open to hire those who are willing to learn and who are willing to apply new skills. So it's just a matter of the route.
Gotcha. Thank you again for sharing all these valuable insights. I guess before we move on to the audience questions in the chat and in the Q&A, are there any final thoughts or pieces of advice that you'd like to share?
Yes, yeah, there is certainly. So I think as someone who went through this career transition quite recently, I want to say that like people should not be afraid of making a change and transition to a different field. So going from one field to another is valuable for a person as an individual, but fields also benefit from those who changed because people are bringing new insights, new ideas, and new views. And even though it can be quite challenging and this transition might require some risk mitigation, especially at the beginning, I think if you have the opportunity and if you find something that you are happy with, you should be open to change and try being brave about being open for a change. And something that then helped me transition from one field to another was certainly this thought of, well, if I find something that I like in a new field and I stick to it, and that's great. I found my niche, so that's something that would make me quite happy. But on the other hand, if I don't, then I have this one more skill where I can transition to another field later on potentially. So build your experiences and be brave to make a change, I guess. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for like all of your thoughtful replies. This was really useful.
And thank you for having me.